Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to our podcast. This newsletter is political, and this is the audio component. Welcome back. We are here in the studio on a hot summer day, just waiting for these rolling blackouts to come in at any second, because Lord knows we're seconds away from having a complete and total disaster. But with that being said, as long as we have electricity, we're going to keep doing this podcast. And today's topic is going to be about labor in Texas. Now, what prompted me to choose this topic for this episode was that North Carolina came out as one of the best states to do business in, for businesses to come in and do businesses in. And then someone commented saying it's the best state to do business in, but it's also the state with like the worst ranking or worst rights and protections for workers. It ranks dead last, 52. That includes DC and Puerto Rico. That's why there's 52. Why there's a list of 52 different, I guess, places. I don't know. Rankings. Anyways, so that prompted me to see where Texas lies on that. And Texas it's not far behind. It's at 47 out of 52. So let's see why Texas is 47 out of 52. But first, hello, Warfield. How are you this morning?
I'm fine. Yourself?
I'm good. So do you want to get into the overview of what we're looking at here?
Yes. Again, what prompted Victoria to look into this was she used to work in North Carolina as a news reporter, and that was a year ago, and that's why that report came out, and she did a report on it. And, of course, the same people who produced the report last year produced a new one this year. And that's where we get the rankings, where Texas is 47th. You know, being a Texan, I don't like being at the bottom of the barrel here in rankings. So, we may want to look at this and see what we can do. Let's kind of clarify this a little bit. This article that comes out annually is produced by an organization that is, I'm going to say, liberal. I mean, these policies are very much what liberals look for in policy. When, if you get into making public policy, these are the things they look at. So it's going to be skewed towards how they view the world. We have to look at Texas. Texas is a conservative state, and they're also very what we call business friendly. If you do not know what business friendly is, move to Texas.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's business friendly for Texas. That's one of the main things that are attracting a lot of the big businesses here. I mean, Elon Musk moved SpaceX here. And then, of course, there's a whole bunch of different businesses that are already located here. A bunch of Fortune 500 companies are here, especially in Dallas. And so let's go right into this labor report. Now, the three different things that we're looking at, I'm having to scroll through my thing here on my computer, but do you have it pulled up to three different?
Yes, the report lists wage policies, worker protections, and rights to organize.
Okay, so wage policies. For Texas, the federal minimum wage has been stuck at, let's see what it's been stuck at, $7.25 per hour for 13 years.
Well, let's clarify that. There is no Texas minimum wage. It just follows the United States minimum wage. Well,
wow.
At least I don't think it's codified that the minimum wage in Texas is $7.25. They just let whatever the federal level is, and they go with that.
Wow. Okay. Which is funny because when I started my first job at Sonic, I made, I think, like $2 or $3 an hour, but it got, there was like that issue because I got tips. So it but it was still nothing.
And that's interesting because this article does bring up what they call sub-minimum wage workers. And people who earn tips, and that would be primarily wait people, get that $2 and whatever, 20, 30 cents an hour because their wages would be compensated by how much they earn in tips. And this article does bring that up as being a problem. But we're not going to get that deep into the details. We're going to stay as an overview. But I do want to bring that up because there is, an issue around this being paid tips. Now, you will hear stories of some white people making a pretty good living, and they do, from tips, especially working at really nice restaurants or bartenders at really nice bars and restaurants. So they do make a good living with tips. they use the $2 and some odd hours basically to have withholding from their checks.
Well, I don't know any people who make a
Not
good
at
living off
Sonic.
of yeah, I was
Not
going
at
to say
Sonic.
not at Sonic. So, and then kind of putting this into more context, there are about 5,700,000 workers in Texas who make less than $15 per hour. Many states have decided not to wait for the federal government to raise the minimum wage and have taken it upon themselves to raise their wage. That is not the case for Texas. Texas has kept the same minimum wage. So it breaks it down by gender. There's about 32% of men make under $15 per hour, and about 49/50% of women make under $15 per hour. And then, of course, they go, further into race, ethnicity, and gender. But I mean, the truth of the matter is, the wage has lost like 20% of its value since 2009, the last time that the federal minimum wage was there. And in Texas, the fact that we don't have any sort of push to raise the minimum wage, especially because we are more I don't know if this is necessarily like just because we have Republicans in office that are holding the majority of power in Texas, or if it's simply because there hasn't been any sort of push to even make the minimum wage higher. I haven't seen any sort of movements or policies in Texas. I've seen like movements in unions like Starbucks and Amazon, but of course, when you're in a business-friendly state, those get squashed pretty quickly.
I think that's the point you're looking for, and that would be the other two categories. They're looking at worker protections and rights to organize. And of course, rights to organize is basically to the ability to create a union or other ways to have worker protections involved that you can, protect your wages or increase your wages or however you want to look at it. So we can break them down each one. Mm-hmm. I'm going to go back, and part of this article made an interesting point, which is actually kind of scary. The last time the minimum wage was close to being a living wage was 1968.
Oh, wow.
So I'm not, and there's an argument. Minimum wage is not supposed to be a career. The jobs that pay minimum wage are not supposed to be a career job. However, when it comes to career jobs, you don't really want to be ranked 47th when you have a young person looking at where do I want to live and start a career? Because these are factors that, you have this push me, pull me of, well, okay, we're going to pay high school kids $7.25 an hour to work 20 hours at some place. But if you want to go to a new job, a new company, you look at where they're located and you look at some of the things that, attract you. And of course, for different people, it's different things. But you don't want to be 47th in labor when you're trying to bring in all these businesses, because some of these people who want to work here at least want some kind of reassurance that, working here is going to be fruitful for them. Mm-hmm. And these are the quality workers, young people coming out of college, people with some experience thinking about changing careers or just changing, companies within their industry. You want them to be able to say, hey, this looks like a good place for me to go earn a living, raise a family, and I have enough to do this, plus do a little bit more, go on my vacations, save money for retirement. So you don't want to be so at the bottom of the barrel in these rankings that you scare good workers off. Mm-hmm. So there's again a push me, pull me in how you want to approach this. So we'll talk, starting with wage policies and this minimum wage. If the federal government jumps the minimum wage up to $15 an hour, all of a sudden, it's just overnight, so to speak, that is going to be a big expense on businesses. It's going to be pretty, impactful. So, if we do this, we may want to do this in a kind of a stair-step fashion, not to scare off businesses from being able to come here and produce jobs. Second thing is, people don't realize this, businesses pay Social Security or half of Social Security. You get it withdrawn from your check, and most people know it in the back of their head. Businesses pay the other half. They don't see it, so they don't really put it in the front of their head. But this is also another expense if you jump up the minimum wage to $15 an hour. So we probably need an increase in Texas. That's a definite fact. But how we do that has to be kind of an involved process instead of just doing it overnight or we're going to scare some people off.
So just to give you some more facts and figures for the wage policies in Texas, localities in Texas cannot set the minimum wage above the state standard, and Texas does extend its minimum wage policy to cover farm workers. But again, $7 and whatever cents an hour is not enough to live. And then for Texas, it's ranked last in the Southwest region. It falls behind the region in compensation and conditions in the workplace. Now, to compare, New Mexico leads the Southwest region through worker protections and compensation. It has a minimum wage of $10.50 an hour, and about 37% of what it takes to a family of four, and that's what it takes a family of four to cover basic costs in the state. So a little bit more facts and figures. And then if we want to go into worker protection policy rankings.
I'd like to go back to a point you made. And
Okay.
This is where some of the arguments get convoluted. Again, minimum wage is supposed to be a job, the part-time jobs, the secondary jobs and things of this nature. But you mentioned, and it's in the article, the farm workers. Farm workers, this is their living. This is how they make a living. And if they're being paid $7.25 an hour, there's no way they're close to making, and I hate this phrase, livable wage, because it's, when you encompass this, it's a lot more than just saying a livable wage and $15 an hour is a livable wage or close to it. Because, different regions have different costs and things like that. So that has to be looked at. But there are certain industries, certain jobs that people are living, are trying to make a living off minimum wage. And it has nothing to do with some of the arguments that, minimum wage is only supposed to be for part-time employees. No, this is real people trying to eke out a living at $7.25 an hour. Farm workers and other types of, I guess, service industry.
Labor?
Yeah,
Well,
laboring. They bring up a whole category of workers. I'm not, like I said, get into a lot of details, but that farm worker, I will just stick with that as an example of a problem with having a $7.25 minimum wage and people living off of it. And that does need to change.
Yeah, because that's not something that is just a temporary job. For some people it is, but for a lot of other people, it's their entire livelihood. So that is something that would be, I guess, a career. And then, so we're going into worker protection policies. Now, I do want to make a note that their individual businesses and companies will have worker protection policies set standard by their business. So these are the state policies. So if you hear something on here, such as does not provide accommodations for pregnant workers, but you're like, oh, wait, whatever tech company is in Texas and they provide accommodation for pregnant workers, there's a difference. There's the company's policy and then there's the state's policy. So this is the state's policy. So worker protection policies that are not provided in the state of Texas. Again, does not provide accommodations for pregnant workers, does not offer protections for workplace breastfeeding, does not prohibit pay secrecy practices in the workplace, does not restrict access to salary history to reduce gender and racial bias, does not provide some form of paid family leave or paid sick leave, does not provide flexible scheduling of worker shifts, does not mandate pay reporting or call-in pay by employers. Now, what is that? I don't understand what that is. Does not mandate pay reporting or call-in pay by employers. Do you know what they're referring to in that regard?
Actually, I don't.
Okay.
I'm trying to think off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Does not mandate pay reporting.
Or call-in pay by, okay. Does not provide split shift pay regulation. Does not provide workers advanced notice of shift scheduling. I have been a victim of this. And I hate it. And I especially hate those, I forgot, there's a certain name for it, but basically where you work the closing shift and the opening shift. That sucks. Does not extend workers' compensation mandates to farmers, and does not extend worker protections to domestic workers, i.e. Like live-in staff, cleaners, etc. So what does Texas do? Mandates equal pay across gender and race, and provides some form of sexual harassment protection in state law.
And to clarify, Vicki made a good point. Employers, this is what the state requires that an employer do, or not, doesn't require an employer to do. Employers can do more. It's just, this is what, if you're going to work in Texas, you have to do basically these two things. Create equal pay across gender and race, and provide some form of sexual harassment protection. Other than that, as a worker, you're going to have to hope your company does a little bit more.
I'm trying to think of like instances where I've come across these policies, but I haven't really, like in Sonic and Chick-fil-A, because those are the two places that I've like technically worked in Texas, besides like, you know, the place that I'm working at now, and when I was doing some other stuff for like schools and just interning and all that stuff. I think the biggest issue that I've seen and witnessed is I would say the flexible scheduling of worker shifts and not providing workers advanced notice of shift scheduling, because people's lives just get turned upside down, and if you don't show up, you're essentially let go, or you're threatened that your job is going to be you know, you're going to be replaced, that you're replaceable, and that someone else can come in here and you know, take over this job. The interesting thing to note is this was before the pandemic. You know, when I was in high school and college, I worked at Sonic and Chick-fil-A, and I think there has been a move during the pandemic and after the pandemic where workers are realizing how much power they have. And we saw so many people quitting. You know, there was a great resignation. There was people on you would see signs saying, get $200 bonus if you join Taco Bell or, you know, Target or something crazy like that, where people were just needing workers because workers were just quitting. So I think that there has been at least some sort of knowledge that, yes, workers are replaceable, but there's power in numbers, and if enough of them quit, you're going to be, you know, out of luck.
When you say workers are replaceable, that's really not a mandated state law. That's the concept of right to work, which means that employers, you know, because you can't unionize, you have no unionization protections. You really, to your point, are replaceable, but it's a broader, falls under a broader umbrella called the right to work concept and philosophy.
So let's get to that. So the third topic, or the third category, the third category that that the policy talks about is the right to organize policies. So it does have a so-called right to work law, and that suppresses unions. How exactly does that suppress unions, or how exactly does that suppress unions?
Well, it suppresses unions indirectly, and you already explained it when you said, you know, if you don't show up, your employer can let you go. Now, most employers do follow a pretty good set of human resource policies, that allow you to, or allow you as a worker some protection, because they'll say, you know, you have to be written up a couple times. You know, it depends on the employer and how severe it can be. But those are things the employers put in place to basically keep you know, some attraction to their workplace, because people don't just want to walk into a job and find out, you know, if they sneeze in the wrong direction, they get fired the next day. You know, that's not a healthy employer-employee relationship, and most employers recognize that. Whether it's codified into the law or not, well, no, it's not in Texas. But even, you know, Texas-bred companies, Texas-born companies have these kind of HR policies in place that allows a little bit of protections that go beyond what's discussed here in your rights to organize policies section. The key is, you know, when suppressing unions is that's an effort. That's an effort by businesses beyond just saying, you know, if we don't like you, we're going to fire you. That's because people can get together. They can off the workplace in a lot of places. They have to do it, you know, away from the workplace. They can get together on their own and say, hey, you know, let's talk about this. And then employers can come along and say, on the workplace, put up a bunch of bulletins and telling you how bad unions are. So this push me, pull me of what we have going with suppressing unions, it's really a much broader thing than just saying, you know, right to work law suppresses unions. There's more to it, because it takes effort to form a union, And of course, it takes effort to tell the workers they don't want a union because they got to go out and explain why.
Are there any benefits for a worker to have a right to work law? Because I'm thinking when it comes to contracts, isn't right to work technically something beneficial for the worker? That's something that has always confused me and something I've had to look into in the past.
If you use the word contract, it's going to be there's quite a bit that goes into a contract.
Right, yeah.
So, who writes it, how's it negotiated, and what's in it. There are whole courts of law that deal with contract law and people arguing about whether or not the contract was fulfilled or not, or what the contract said or didn't say. Mm-hmm. So you have to be real careful when you use the word contracts.
Okay, so here's another policy that the right to organize policy that Texas does not have, does not protect workers against wage theft retaliation. Now, what does that look like? Can you give us an example of wage theft retaliation?
I cannot give an example, but I got a pretty good idea. This is, if you, and there is a problem with some companies who do this, especially in the tip world. If you think your company is taking or withholding money from you from your paycheck, you have a right to pursue this. But there's no laws that say if you go out and make an accusation against your company and, do whatever the procedural things are to try to address that your company doesn't have to keep you. They can let you go if you make this accusation. Apparently, that's the way it looks like, the way it reads.
I can give an example. Now, this is according to the Department of Labor. Here's an example. Neil is a cook at a restaurant and works an average of 50 hours a week. I feel you, Neil. He contacts WHD, which is Wage and Hour Division at the Department of Labor, confidentially to inquire about overtime pay. He tells another cook that he learned from WHD they should be earning extra pay for the overtime hours worked. Their manager overhears the conversation and fires Neil. I can give another example. I'll give another example. Deborah requested FMLA leave from her job as a hotel desk clerk when she began suffering from migraine headaches and made it impossible for her to work. She was approved for intermittent FMLA leave and used it for 3 days in January and 1 day in February. In April, Deborah had another migraine that caused her to be out on FMLA for 2 days. Upon her return, Deborah discovered her new manager had reduced her schedule from 40 hours to 20 hours a week, saying that the company needed workers who would show up every day. In this example, Deborah's hours were reduced because she exercised her right to FMLA, which is prohibited as retaliation by her employer and an FMLA violation. Ooh, try saying that 3 times fast. FMLA, FMLA, FMLA. Yeah.
You did it?
Yeah. Okay, so basically, Texas does not provide policy or does not protect workers against wage theft retaliation. So if something like this were to happen, there might be HR policies that say, oh, this person can't, your supervisor can't retaliate against you for, learning about your rights as a worker. But there's nothing from the state that necessarily says that. And then no policies requiring collective bargaining for public workers. That's essentially union contracts and yeah. So, wow, Texas. Not the best state to work in, literally. It's ranked number 47. The best state to work in is Oregon, but again, this is based on policies, not necessarily like standard of living, but wages go directly into standard of living, or at least are a component of it.
And it does. We say, make the joke, Texas is a business-friendly state. A lot of businesses come here, but they do bring their policies, what they give their workers, because they need to attract talented people. If you really want to get, talented people, good worker, talented people on career tracks, or people just being good workers, they just want to show up and work 40 hours a week, you need to give them something to make them feel like, this job gives them an opportunity to do, have a life, raise a family, secondary things like go on vacation, save money, have a hobby. people want these things beyond just having a job. And employers are, recognizing this. The pandemic kind of highlighted that, but, to a bigger thing, this has been going on for years. Employers have been slowly building in, especially among the tech companies, secondary benefits beyond what any government is codified into law that says they have to do. So you also have to look into what type of employer you're going to work for. So the state may or may not have an impact in some of these situations based on who you work for.
Mm-hmm. So one of the reasons why Texas is considered business friendly is because there is no corporate or personal income tax. Companies doing business in Texas enjoy one of the lowest overall tax burdens in the country. This is according to, I believe, like the Texas Economic Development Council, which is a Texas state department, I guess. Council department, those are two different things. But it just says Texas Economic Development, and it's a government website. So I'm going to call it a department. I don't know. Okay. Yeah.
You looked at it. I'm sorry, I didn't look at that.
No, you're
website.
good. I was just, it's gov.tex.gov.
Oh, then that's a department.
Okay.
Yeah. It's got a gov on it, yeah.
Okay. So the reason why it's friendly is because there's no corporate or personal income tax. There are about 53 Fortune 500 companies, thousands of publicly traded companies, and 3 million small businesses. And Texas, it says that Texas economy is the 10th largest when compared to nations of the world, which is, because I was like, 10th largest in the United States. No, 10th largest compared to some of the nations in the world. Texas, it says Texas prides itself on being a right-to-work state and will continue to making strategic investments to ensure it maintains our competitive advantage, allowing businesses to prosper and grow. I mean, strategic investment is investing in our power grid, because once our power grid shuts down, none of these businesses are going to be SOL. So anyways, we're going to wrap up this episode. Before we wrap up, if you want to make any last points, say them. But I want to wrap up using your worst, like the worst day on the job, or one of the worst experiences you've had on the job working in Texas. Yeah. There's so many, huh?
No. You can have worse days on the job that have nothing to do with the topic we've talked about.
I know, because I had an example, or I do have an example,
I'll go back to one, and this goes way back. And I was working part-time while I went to college to help, I basically worked myself through college. And, we had our little part-time job, and we had our little annual raise that we all got, because we had a review, because it's what we do in Texas or any employer. And my boss at the time said, I'm not going to give you a raise because and literally I, on their little review sheet, had excellent across the board to make you want to do better. And I just jaw dropped. I know it was only 25 cents an hour. I was like 20, 21.
But it's still a slap in the face.
It was, because it was like, you just said I'm doing my job well. I mean, excellent. I meet all the check boxes, whatever. And no, I'm not going to give you, now this is the manager. I did protest this when I went, I'm going to go talk to somebody. I did get my little 25 cents an hour. But in reality, that's what can happen in Texas, is they don't have to give a raise just because you're doing a good job. And, I was young, and it was kind of like jaw-dropping shock. And, I've long gone on that, but I always remembered that, because it was, you've got to be kidding me moment.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, that's one of the consequences of not having these worker protection policies. I've worked in a number of states and places. I've even worked in Spain, like literally worked in Spain, as a front desk assistant. So that was fun. It actually was a lot of fun. Even though I don't speak Spanish fluently, and half the time I had to go call the supervisor and be like, hey, this person is speaking straight Spanish and I'm not sure exactly what they want. But I'm going to go back just to my first job, because so I won't get retaliated against from my former employers. But the place that I used to work at, Sonic, the one that I used to work at is no longer in business. They shut it down. First of all, that should tell you, there's a reason why they shut it down. Number two, this was like the, what was it? This was a few weeks into the job. One of the managers sent me home early. Okay, this isn't really like a bad thing, and then there was not a retaliation. Anyway, let me just get into the story. One of the managers sent me home early, and then I came back the next day, and then I found out the reason that I was sent home early is because the manager was pocketing money from the store or whatever. And so they were going over because I had to like clock in and clock out and report how much tips I got and like all this crazy stuff. And so they were looking over my tips, they were looking over my hours, and they were having to like see if I was the one pocketing the money or if it was my supervisor the one pocketing the money. And because apparently she was saying like, if it's not me, it wasn't me, it must have been, because I was 16 at the time, it must be her pocketing the money, whatever. So I had to go through not an interrogation, but it was pretty terrifying. Looking back, it should have been terrifying, but I just was like, no, I didn't. I was sent home early, and then everything got settled because they ended up looking at the cameras. They had to end up going back to look at the cameras, the CT, TV, whatever, and saw that I actually did leave at the time that I said I left. And but what was intimidating was that place always was like, I felt like I was being accused of not reporting my tips. Because they're always like, we're giving you so much money. How are you not, like, we don't think you're reporting your tips correctly. Are you sure you're not reporting your tips correctly? I'm like, nobody tips at Sonic. No one knows to tip at Sonic. Like that, like, and I'm not going to tell people like, oh, you should tip me because I get paid $2.30, like nobody knows to tip at Sonic. So that was my frustration. Yeah. Anyways, well, I hope everyone has a good rest of your week. If you're working today, that sucks. I'm sorry. If you're working where you're listening to this, continue to listen because we'll have more episodes coming out. And we will talk to you next time.